Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. This is the 31st session, and we will start a new section of verses. To be precise, we will begin with verse 204. This section of verses deals with the hypocrites and the way they would behave with Muslims. And Muslims are told to be aware of their pranks and their mischief. They would work against them, and at the same time, they are also told that they must stand at guard against their machinations. So these verses begin with the words, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يُعْجِبُكَ قَوْلُهُ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَيُشْهِدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا فِي قَلْبِهِ وَهُوَ أَلَدُّ الْخِصَامِ. You have to fight those who stop you from this worship ritual of Hajj. And here the situation is that among you there are some whose conversation pleases you in the life of this world, and they even make God witnesses to the intention of their hearts, but they are the deadliest of enemies. So remember, in our previous study of verses, the issue of Hajj was being discussed, and the way we were told that if Muslims were going there for Hajj and they are stopped and if they are attacked, then although they cannot take the initiative, but they can obviously defend themselves. And at the same time, such is the precarious situation that on the one hand, you would be encountering this militant intent of the Quraysh, and on the other hand, your own ranks are filled with people or replete with people who are going to make it very tough than before. So that is why the Almighty is warning believers that on the one hand, they have war at hand, they might have to fight the Quraysh, and on the other hand, their own ranks, they consist of people about whom they must remain aware. وَإِذَا تَوَلَّى سَعَى فِي الْأَرْضِ لِيُفْسِدَ فِيهَا وَيُهْلِكَ الْحَرْثَ وَالنَّسْلَ وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْفَسَادَ وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُ اتَّقِ اللَّهَ أَخَذَتْهُ الْعِزَّةُ بِالْإِثْمِ فَحَسْبُهُ جَهَنَّمُ وَلَبِئْسَ الْمِهَادُ. This is what they do in front of you, and as soon as they leave that place, they hasten to spread disorder in the land, ravish crops, and destroy generations of people. And you know that God does not like disorder. And when they are told, have fear of God, with an inclination towards sin, they are afflicted by their arrogance. So sufficient for them is hell, and it is a very evil abode. So this warning by the Quran regarding the hypocrites has to be paid heed to. And believers, of course, there were many amongst them who were very gullible, who would accept whatever these people would say. And these hypocrites of Medina, of course, when conversing about jihad, they would express great enthusiasm and ensure their wholehearted support to Muslims. However, when they would leave the presence of the Prophet, they would strive all out to disillusion people from his message and harm its cause in whatever way they could. So this is how they would try to deceive the Muslims. So on the face of them, in the presence of the Prophet, they would make all sorts of vows that they are ready with their wholehearted support. But when they would go out of the presence of the Prophet, they would disillusion people from this message. And they are warned that this pretentious display can only last in this world. On the day of judgment, they shall be fully exposed and would not be able to hide what they now are able to conceal. So, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ رَءُوفٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. And there are also those among these very people who would give away their lives in order to find favor with God. It is these who are forgiven by the Almighty if they err. And it is to such people that God is very compassionate. يا أيها الذين آمنوا ادخلوا في السلم كافة ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين فإن زللتم من بعد ما جاءتكم البينات فاعلموا أن الله عزيز حكيم. Believers, these two diverse attitudes cannot persist along with faith. So enter all of you into God's submission with one attitude and do not follow in Satan's footsteps. He is your inveterate foe. If you lapse even after these open warnings that have come to you, you should know that God is mighty, very wise. So the very address by the word believers, of course, should not alarm us in any way that believers of strong faith are being spoken of. No, believers of weak faith and faith to this extent that they have almost become hypocrites, or they have become close to hypocrites, they are being addressed here. And they are being told that all of you as one unit should enter the folds of Islam. Udkhulu fi silmi kafa. All of you should enter the folds of Islam as a group, and you should not follow the footsteps of Satan, because he is an open foe. He is an inveterate foe who has challenged their forefather Adam at the very beginning, that he is going to lead people astray. So they must stand on guard against him. And then it says that if you lapse after these open warnings that have come to you, you should know that God is very mighty and wise. Of course, referring to the fact that if in spite of these warnings, they must be paid heed to. And if they are not paid heed to, then it is said that if you lapse after these warnings, then God is mighty and wise. Of course, referring to the fact that he is going to be very stern in his punishment. The address, though made in general words, it's actually, as you can see, is directed towards the hypocrites. They are told that instead of following the footsteps of Satan, they should follow the true believers who are willing to sacrifice everything to find favor with your Lord. So, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu udkhulu fis silmi fil kaffa, it of course refers to those hypocrites or those weak in faith, and they are being told that they should not follow the footsteps of Satan. Instead, they should follow the true believers. هل ينظرون إلا أن يأتيهم الله في ظلل من الغمام والملائكة وقضي الأمر وإلى الله ترجع الأمور سل بني إسرائيل كم آتيناهم من آيات بينات ومن يبدل نعمة الله من بعد ما جاءته فإن الله شديد العقاب. In spite of the fact that the truth has been revealed to them in a conclusive manner, are they only awaiting for God and His angels to come down to them in the shadow of clouds and the matter be settled? But this is not the way of God, and all such affairs rest with God only. Ask the Israelites, how many a manifest sign we bestowed upon them, but to what benefit? And in reality, those who change God's gift of guidance with deviance after it is bestowed on them, they cannot save themselves from the grasp of God, because God is stern in retribution. So clearly we can see that these people are people who have strayed from the path. They are being told time and again that if the guidance of the Prophet is not enough, would they like that God should come down with His angels in the shadow of clouds? And is that what they are waiting for? And is that something which will make them believe? So again, they are being told that Sal Bani Israel kam atainahum in ayatim bayyinat, that you need to ask the people of the Israelites that God sent them so many signs, and they did not accept these signs. And in fact, the comment of the Quran is that how many manifest signs bestowed upon them, but it had no effect on them, but to no avail. And in reality, those who change God's gift of guidance with deviance after it is bestowed on them, they cannot save themselves from the grasp of God. Once again, it's a warning being meted out to them. It's a warning being handed out to them, and they are being told that this is not the way. They have the Prophet amongst them. This is one of the final stages that they are being given another opportunity to survive and to pay heed to this message. And they should become strong in faith, must not be inclined with the hypocrites, and the hypocrites themselves should also try to mend their ways. Otherwise, for them there is this doom which is destined, and once this doom arrives, there is none who can save them. And as the verse says, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ, God is stern in retribution. So I'm going to stop here and pause here for a moment, and if you have any questions regarding what we have studied up till now, you may raise them. Okay, زُيِّنَ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا وَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا فَوْقَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَاللَّهُ يَرْزُقُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. For these disbelievers, the life of this world has been decked with luring attractions. When they are warned of its faith, they do not pay heed and scoff at the believers. Whereas those who fear God will, in contrast, be in a high rank on the day of judgment. This is the blessing of the Almighty for them, and God will give His blessings without measure to whomsoever He intends. So once again, you can see that how the Almighty has warned that remember this: the life of this world is decked with a lot of attractions and lures, and this is part of the trial and test, which has been, which is like a rule. It's going to confront every person as he or she would enter this life and go through it. So the fact is that not only these disbelievers, they find this lure and this attraction in these external things which they encounter, which they might be lured from or lured with. They also make fun of the believers. They say, well, these are people who are so poor and they're so faint-hearted, so to speak, and they themselves would like to come to grips with this message, but alas, this is something which they are not able to. So it says, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا فَوْقَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, and the Quran says that in contrast to these people who make fun of the believers and who themselves have been misled by Satan, in contrast to these people, those who fear God, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا فَوْقَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, they will have a high rank on the day of judgment. So those who fear God will in contrast be in a high rank on the day of judgment. وَاللَّهُ يَرْزُقُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, and God will give His blessings without measure to whomsoever He intends. So remember the word rizq, we have been talking about this word earlier also. It does not merely refer to physical sustenance or the fodder that we generally eat. So rizq is spiritual as well, and rizq is physical as well. So spiritual and all spiritual favors and all physical favors, in fact, they are ones that can be termed as rizq per se. So when God is going to give that rizq بغير حساب, which means without measure, one can literally imagine how one will be drenched with these favors. كان الناس أمة واحدة فبعث الله النبيين مبشرين ومنذرين وأنزل معهم الكتاب بالحق ليحكم بين الناس فيما اختلفوا فيه فما اختلف فيه إلا الذين أوتوه من بعد ما جاءتهم البينات بغيا بينهم فهدى الله الذين آمنوا لما اختلفوا فيه من الحق بإذنه والله يهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. They present differences amongst people as a pretext for their hypocrisy. So you see, once again, we have to turn back to the context, and the context is talking about these hypocrites, how they would try to dilly-dally, how they would try to defer their own final verdict in this regard, and how they would like to affect and have an impact on weak Muslims. And one of the things that they would present would be that, look, how can we enter the fold of Islam when there are so many differences and people have different views? So they are being told that كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً, that once people were the same. In fact, the translation, if I do justice to it, it would be, they should know that mankind was a single community. They were all on one path. Then differences arose between them. So it says, after that, God sent forth prophets as bearers of glad tidings and as warners, and with them He sent down His book as the decisive truth, so that it may settle between people the differences among them. Only they differed in it to whom it was given after very clear signs had come to them because of malice for one another. So the Quran is once again telling us that the differences which have arisen, it's not that these differences cannot be resolved, because precisely this had happened earlier on when mankind was created. They were created as one community. And when differences arose, so in order to circumvent this, in order to solve this issue, the Almighty sent a series of prophets. And in spite of those prophets coming, these people still were adamant and stubborn in their differences. And the reason which the Quran has presented here, as you can see, is بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ, which means malice against one another. They had this malice against one another. And then the Quran says, فَهَدَى اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لِمَا اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الْحَقِّ بِإِذْنِهِ. Then these who believed in the Quran, God guided them by His grace about the truth in which they were differing, and God guides whomsoever He intends according to His law to the straight path. So when these books were revealed, and finally the book which we call the Quran was revealed, God was able to guide the believers through it. But the hypocrites and people who still maintained this, or they wanted to maintain this difference, they were further misled because of their wrong attitude. And you see, one of the important things that the Quran has mentioned here is that God guides or misguides those according to His law, which of course means that He guides or misguides. His guidance or misguidance is not based on any whim or any desire. It's based on a law. And we have been studying this law in earlier parts of this surah as well. And so God says that a person who actually gives due regard to the innate guidance with which he is born, the awareness between good and evil, so such people are guided and given further guidance by so that they have this urge to accept the guidance which comes to them in the form of divine revelation. But people who do not value this inner guidance, who in fact disregard it, they turn a deaf ear towards this awareness of good and evil which is found in them. They do not follow the calls of their conscience. About such people, the Almighty says that He does not guide them. Not only does He not guide them, He puts a seal on their hearts. He puts a seal on their eyes, and they are not able to be guided. So basically, when it is said that God guides whomsoever He wants to, it only tells us that the power with which God can do something is such that no one can stop Him. However, this power itself is governed by His wisdom, which means that it's not that He misguides people deliberately or guides them out of His own whims. His guidance and misguidance, as I just said, is based on His law, which is that if people they give due value to their innate guidance, they will be guided further. And if they turn a deaf ear towards their innate guidance, then as a punishment, they are misguided. So this is something which the Quran has mentioned. أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. These hypocrites think that all the hardships that they face should be overcome by the help of God without being entrusted with any responsibility to deal with them. So, of course, this is a slightly longish suppression which Ustaz has pointed out, Ustaz Javed Ghamidi has pointed out, and they think that these hardships that they are facing, they should be overcome with the help of God without being entrusted in responsibility. So remember, they would also think that why should God test them to this extent? Why is it that they are, in spite of being believers, in spite of believing in God, they should be put in such difficulty at length? And now they are being told that, do you think that you would go to paradise even though you have not yet encountered the circumstances which were encountered by people before you as a result of messengers being sent to them? So they are being told that, well, this is something which is not new. This is something which has arisen because of the fact that this is an established practice of the Almighty. The more responsibility you have, the more you will be entrusted. So if you are companions of the Prophet, then your responsibility is much more, and as a result, your trial and test is also much more tough. And this is an established practice of the Almighty. Previous prophets and their companions were also tested to the ultimate extent. And look what the Quran says. It says that when they were tested with ba'sa and wadharra, which means that affliction and hardships befell them, they were so shaken that they said, Mata Nasrullah, Hatta Yaqulu Rasulu Wallazina Amanu Mahu Mata Nasrullah. That when shall the help of God arrive? When shall the help of God arrive? This, of course, which tells us that such horrific circumstances that they faced, and how tough situations they encountered, that even prophets of God, even and companions whom we know and revere, that have a very strong faith, even they were compelled to say these words, Mata Nasrullah, when is the help of God going to arrive? And then they were given these glad tidings, Allah, Inna Nasrallahi Qareeb. Listen, God's help is near. So when things are getting out of hand, things are becoming unbearable, this is the time to understand that now God's help is going to arrive, because He does not put a burden on a person or a soul which is beyond his capacity. يسألونك ماذا ينفقون قل ما أنفقتم من خير فللوالدين والأقربين واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل وَمَا تَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ وَمَا تَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. They ask you about what they should spend. Tell them, whatever wealth you spend is for your parents and the kinsfolk and for the orphans, the destitute and the wayfarer of your society. So spend according to your capacity. And rest assured that whatever virtue you do shall never go waste, because God is fully aware of it. Now, once again, you can see that this tendency of the hypocrites, that they would ask questions, and these questions would reflect their minds. And the Muslims who were weak in faith, they thought that jihad and infaq, which we have already discussed in the previous section, they would say, well, how much should we spend? And the topic of the revival of Sharia, which began with the directive of Qisas earlier on, this is somewhere in verse 177 or 178, is now going to conclude after these questions which are answered. But once again, you can clearly see that as far as these people are concerned, they are constantly pestering the Prophet that how much should they spend for this jihad. And they are being told, قُلْ مَا أَنفَقْتُمْ مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ, that whatever wealth you are going to spend, don't worry, it's not going to go waste. Your first and foremost duty to spend in this jihad and this infaq, which has arisen as a result, is for your own parents. So remember, this is something which the Quran is telling us, that infaq or spending in charity, spending for the welfare of people, should start with your own parents. And for bil walidain, and then your near and kin, and then the orphans, and then the destitute, and then the traveler. So all these heads are spelled out once again before them, and they are told that remember that this is not something which is going to go waste, and everything that they do, وَمَا تَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ, whatever virtue that they do, whatever good things that they do, God has full knowledge of them. So instead of asking this question again and again, remember this is the answer that has already been given, and if you would like to know further, then the heads of this charity, the heads of this spending, start off with your own parents, which actually tells us the importance of how we have to look after people who are extremely near to us, and there's no one nearer to us than our parents. And the Quran says that they should be the first recipients. They should be the first recipients of the money that you would like to spend for the cause of God. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Warfare is ordained for you, and it is also displeasing to you, like it is displeasing to you to spend in the way of God, even though it is very much possible that you may dislike a thing, and precisely that thing is good for you. And it is very much possible that you like a thing and it is bad for you. And in reality, God knows, but you have no knowledge of many such things. So once again, you can see clearly that when the Almighty has asked Muslims to prepare themselves for war, which they would like, it's very likely that if the Quraysh stop them, then they will have to, they'll have to retaliate. If they are the first to be militant and raise arms and against them, then believers have to reply. So if this is the case, then you have to be ready for this war. And remember that this is something that might be displeasing to you, but in the end it is something which would augur well for you. And then this is a general statement also which the Quran has given, that at times you do not like something. عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, but it is in fact better for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ, but you like something whereas ultimately it is not in your favor. And then God says, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. So God knows and you do not know. So if this warfare has been ordained for you and you find it to be displeasing, as is the case, then remember this is something that you must realize, that warfare for the cause of God is something which is ultimately going to be better for you. And as I said earlier on, that these verses also sound a very general principle to us as well, that whenever we find something going against our wishes and we think that it is something that is an order of God or something that we cannot avoid, then we must wholeheartedly embrace it, because the glad tidings that are behind it are that at times we might not understand the wisdom, the the benefit that we might obtain from that particular act that we might despise. But in hindsight, we can also see that there were so many instances in our own lives as well, when we look back, that things were bitter, they sounded bitter, but they're sweet, their fruit was sweet. And things that sounded sweet, and we often saw that the fruit that they bore was sour. And this is something which is a life lesson from the Quran. And of course, it is couched in words which are specific for the hypocrites. But we can draw this general lesson that at times things might not look good. They might be very, very tough, but then there is some good hidden in it. And some things would happen to our pleasure. We would like such certain things to happen. But God says that had He let them happen, they would have been bad for you. So you have to trust God, and that is what these verses sum up at the end. Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun. God knows, but you do not know. Hence, you need to trust God. So, do we have any questions until now, or should I continue with the rest of the verses?
Regarding Allah saying that He guides people based on Allah, and so everybody has this kind of innate guidance. I've met some people that seem to have an extreme level of this innate guidance. I don't even know if that could be considered innate guidance at that point, but some people that are, for example, incredibly against capital punishment, which is something that in Islam that's important to sort of get rid of the person who's doing fahisha in the world. And so that makes me wonder, why are they so empathetic towards criminals or people that are like being terrible to other people? Why do they have that much empathy from Allah?
I think this is something that human nature is prone to, and mercy, or the fact that it has this balance tilted in one favor, often takes it to a certain extreme, and that is why divine guidance is needed. In the absence of divine guidance, people would generally think that if life has been taken, what is the use of another life being taken? It's just a waste of another life, because you just cannot bring back the life that has already been taken. So this is how generally people would think of. I think I would also think the same. But I have been guided, and we have been guided by God, that remember, it's not just a life that has been taken. You have to stop instances in future that more lives should not be taken. So in order to make it a measure which would be a deterrent for any future instances of murder, the Quran has prescribed this capital punishment, or this qisas, so that this doesn't happen again. But without this divine guidance, maybe we too, or people without this guidance, would have decided that, as I said, that what is the use of taking a second life, because the second life is not going to bring back the first one. And the wisdom of God has decided this matter by telling us that, well, it's not the question, or just not the matter of bringing back that first life. It's a question of avoiding its recurrence in future. So I think there are instances in human life in which we need this divine guidance, and in the absence of divine guidance, I think this is what would have naturally happened, and as you can see, it has happened. So the Quran and the Torah both insist on this the issue of qisas, which means that you have to insist on life for life, unless of course there is this instance of forgiveness. But then, as I said, these are areas that divine guidance has to be appreciated. Otherwise, in its absence, it's this human nature to tilt in one favor. Either you become extremely merciful, or you become extremely revengeful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Adil Qureshi, please go ahead.
So this logic about kanan nasu ummatam wahida, my understanding is that Allah actually does not expect or does not want all the mankind to remain on Islam anyway. And when the world ends, not the whole world will be Muslims. Some of them will still be, non-Muslims, and Muslims will still be living till the end of the world. So why this argument that there used to be a time when everybody was Muslim is important?
No, actually, the argument that is being put forth by the Quran is the reverse. You see, these hypocrites would say that people are of different types, and which one should we believe in? So they are being told that this is nothing new. in previous history also, yes, mankind started off as a single community, but very soon differences arose. And these differences were resolved by, mankind could not resolve them by themselves. So they needed divine guidance. So remember, the context is the hypocrites who think that, well, if there are so many different views, how can we just accept one view and enter into the folds of Islam? So they are being told that, well, this has been the practice of the Almighty, that He has allowed people to accept out of their own will. However, He has guided them externally by sending down His prophets, so that if they have recourse to the prophets and the books that are revealed with these prophets, then these differences would be minimized. So God has actually laid down His own procedure in this regard, and He has tried to give them this lesson that differences of opinion is not a pretext to not accept the right opinion.
Okay, so the argument is not, so kana nasu ummatum wahida is not
That is the
not
starting point. And that is
starting point.
not the
It's not the
argument.
argument.
Not the argument itself.
Right. So the second question is yasalunaka maza yunfikun.
Mhm.
I would expect, because the context of these ayahs was jihad and then the infaq that is related to
Mhm.
jihad, I would
Mhm.
expect that the infaq that you would want to do would be for to prepare for horses, to prepare for weapons, to
Mhm.
prepare for food for the soldiers who would be participating in the battle. But Allah
Mhm.
did not ask them to spend in these kinds of expenses, but rather asked them to spend on parents, on travelers, and things like these. Why would
Right.
that be?
So, because you see, if you take a look at the previous verses, the verses that we have started earlier on in our previous sessions, the topic of jihad and infaq is going on in tandem. And just as infaq is related to jihad, because of course it cannot be conducted without those resources, independently, infaq is also treated as a separate entity also. So this is the question here does not relate to warfare. It relates to, in general, how much would we spend for the cause of God. So you just need to glance back over the previous verses, and you'll find that it's not just infaq which is related to jihad that is under discussion. So independently, infaq is also under discussion, and that is why here we find that the Quran has given them this answer that you don't need to go anywhere to find out the heads of charity or their spending. They are right before you. So let's continue. يسألونك عن الشهر الحرام قتال فيه قل قتال فيه كبير وصد عن سبيل الله وكفر به والمسجد الحرام وإخراج أهله منه أكبر عند الله والفتنة أكبر من القتل. They ask you about the directive of warfare in the sacred month. Say, warfare in this month is a very grave thing, but to impede others from the path of God, to not believe in Him, to stop people from going to the sacred mosque, and to expel its dwellers from there is far graver in God's sight. So you see how important God has, how important this whole exercise in the Quran is. That of course the sanctity of the sacred months is absolutely unquestionable. You have to honor those sacred months, and there should be no warfare. But God says that something which is even more graver, and what is that? Saddun an sabilillah, to stop people from the way of God. Wa kufrum bihi, and to have disbelief in Him. Wal masjidil haram, and to stop people from going to the sacred mosque. And wa ikhraju ahlihi minhu akbaru, and turning out people from that place. So all these things are far graver than not violating the sanctity of the months. So if this is something which occurs in these months and you have to circumvent them, then you have this green signal from God. And then it is these very, very important words are sounded, and they are wal fitnatu akbaru mil qatl, which means that this persecution is much more grievous than bloodshed. So wal fitnatu ashaddu min al qatl, it tells us, we all know how grievous a sin is qatl, how grievous a sin is murder. But God says that persecution is much more graver, which means that if you force people to give up their religion, this sin is far greater than killing people, because you are going to kill them spiritually. So killing people physically is one thing, but when you stop people from following what they think is right, then you are killing them spiritually, and this is far greater a death than you can give a person than to kill his body. وَلَا يَزَالُونَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ حَتَّى يَرُدُّوكُمْ عَنْ دِينِكُمْ إِنِ اسْتَطَاعُوا. And then we have these very, very enlightening words, that you should know that the people against whom you have been directed to wage war have decided between themselves that they will continue to fight against you to the extent that if it is possible for them, that they make you renounce your faith. So they will go as far as to make you renounce your faith. Such is their intent. So Muslims are being warned that they must think that they are facing an enemy who is hell bent on making them lose their faith. And then the Quran says, وَمَنْ يَرْتَدِدْ مِنْكُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِ فَيَمُتْ وَهُوَ كَافِرٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ حَبِطَتْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أُولَٰئِكَ يَرْجُونَ رَحْمَةَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. So if you just have this connection from the previous page, it says that as far as the Quran is concerned, and whoever of you renounces his faith and dies in this state of disbelief, then it is such people whose deeds will bear no fruit in this world and in the world to come. So of course what is being said here is that you have to understand that whatever force they might exercise in making you give up your religion and renounce your religion, this is something that you have to bear with, because if you end up giving up your religion, then the Quran says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ حَبِطَتْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ, that such people, the deeds of such people will bear no fruit in this world and in the world to come. They'll be companions of the fire and where they'll stay forever. And then on the other hand, it is said that people who have adhered to faith, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا, so who have migrated and have waged war for the cause of God, it is they who may hope for God's mercy, and God is forgiving and merciful. So this is a common style of the Quran, that whenever people are concerned who have a different attitude, they are compared with people who have a positive attitude, then they are placed side by side. So on the one hand are people who, if they end up renouncing faith, about them this news is given that their deeds of this world and in the hereafter shall go waste. But on the other hand, people who adhere to faith, they migrate for the cause of God, and then it says, وَجَاهَدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and they also wage war for the cause of God, then they are the ones who should expect God's mercy. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ قُلْ الْعَفْوَ كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمُ الْآيَاتِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ. They ask you about drinking and gambling because in their society they are also a means of helping the poor. So remember, the context that is being discussed earlier on is the context of infaq and jihad, and of course out of this infaq also has arisen this question. So this question that, well, the Quran has proscribed gambling and the Quran has also proscribed drinking. But the thing is that both liquor and both gambling were a means of welfare, as we shall just see in the times of in the times of the Prophet. So why is it that the Quran is proscribing them? Why is it prohibiting them? So remember, these are the questions that have been posed by one after the other. We have a question about warfare, we have a question about infaq, and now we have this question about khamr and maisir. Khamr, of course, is alcohol and maisir is gambling. So the question is being asked one after the other, and it is as if the Almighty has stopped the flow of Surah Baqarah, and He's now answering these questions which were there in the air, or they were being asked to the Prophet. So it's like halting the discourse and then answering these questions one by one, and then once again taking up the surah from the part where it was left off. So this also shows us how the Quran is like a living relationship that the Prophet and the companions used to have, because of the fact that it's not just a bland revelation of verses or comment on verses or events which took place in the time of the Prophet. It has this holistic impact on their lives. It would take up questions which were found in the minds of people. It would take up questions which would be raised by the hypocrites. And as you can see, it is as if this divine rain of the Quran, which was being poured down, was just given this break. And then the Almighty said, let me answer these questions that they are now posing. So the question that has now arisen, once again, you can see that the sequence of these questions has some connection and coherence as well, because of the fact that charity was being discussed, and because alcohol and drinking was something which was charitable in those times. And how were they charitable? Well, as we know that in those times, people would get drunk, inebriated by drinking alcohol, and in this inebriation, they would slaughter animals, their camels specifically, and they would gamble on the meat of those camels. And whoever person lost that meat while gambling, that would be distributed among the poor. So you see, indirectly, alcohol and gambling was benefiting the poor, because they would gamble, and the gambled meat would be distributed amongst the poor people. So people thought, well, there is some good in this exercise, and gambling and drinking is producing welfare for these people. So why is it that the Quran is proscribing them? And then the Quran has answered them in these sublime words, and it says, وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِن نَفْعِهِمَا. It says there is a great sin in both, and no doubt they have some benefits for people, but their sin is far greater than their benefits. So it says, although there is some benefit, but their sin is far greater, which means that the moral sin of drinking or inebriation or getting inebriated through drinking is far greater. So its moral wrong, or the moral harm that it causes, is far greater than the benefit that it might ensue. And then you see the question being repeated once again. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ. What exactly are we supposed to spend? So they ask you, what should we spend? Remember, we had this question earlier on, a couple of verses. So it seems that this repeated question of spending in the way of God was weighing heavily upon them, because it's not easy to spend for other people. So now the answer given by the Almighty is قُلِ الْعَفْوِ, which means that everything which is beyond your own needs, which whether they be personal or their business needs, whether they be of the present or of the future, whatever they have surplus, Quran says that is what you should spend. And then it says, كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمُ الْآيَاتِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ. God thus explains to you His revelations so that you may reflect on the matters of both. And then it says, فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. So it goes on to say, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. So once this was finished, the topic of infaq was finished, or linked up with khamr and maisir, which is of course gambling and liquor. Another question that arose was about the orphans. Of course, warfare would produce orphans, and what exactly should we do regarding these orphans? So they would ask this question also. And the question is that what should be done with their orphans? And the Quran says, قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. Say, in whatever is their welfare is better. And then it says, وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. And if by marrying their mothers you share their affairs, they are your brothers. فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. So once again we are told that in case that you have to dispense with the welfare of the orphans, and for this marrying their mothers is something which is good, then of course you can do this. وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. And if by marrying their mothers they share your affairs, فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ, they are your brothers now. So once again you should be in a position to help them the way a brother helps a brother. And then the Quran says, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الْمُفْسِدَ مِنَ الْمُصْلِحِ وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَأَعْنَتَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. And God knows the one who means mischief and the one who intends reform. And if God wished, He could have made matters difficult for you by not giving you this permission. Indeed, God is mighty, very wise. Again, you know that the Almighty could have said, well, you must work for the welfare of the orphans and do your best as you can. But He gave this permission that you can marry their mothers, because this would make things easier for you, and they will become your brethren. And so therefore, this concession is something which has been given to you. But As the verse says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَأَعْنَتَكُمْ. Had God wanted, He would not have given you this concession, and He would have made things difficult for you. But He relented towards you and gave you this concession, so that in this way you could easily you could easily dispense with the needs of the orphan and be more affectionate and sympathetic with them. وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنَّا وَلَا أَمَةٌ مُؤْمِنَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكَةٍ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ وَلَا تُنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنُوا وَلَعَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَكُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى النَّارِ وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُو إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ وَالْمَغْفِرَةِ بِإِذْنِهِ وَيُبَيِّنُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. And even for the welfare of the orphans also, do not wed idolatrous women. Do not wed idolatrous women unless they embrace faith. And remember that a believing slave girl is better than an upright idolatrous woman, although you may fancy her. And do not also wed your women to the idolaters unless they embrace faith. And remember that a believing slave is better than an upright idolater, although you may fancy him. These polytheists call you to hell, and God by His grace invites you to paradise and to forgiveness, and explains His revelations to people so that they may take heed. So we have to first understand that the word mushrikun or al-mushrikun, as you can see, it is appended by an article of definition, which is alif lam. So here it qualifies the polytheists of Arabia, and the Quran specifically uses this word for them. Other people of the world can be regarded as polytheists if they positively subscribe to polytheism, but they cannot be called the polytheists which are being discussed here, because they, unless they willingly and they subscribe to this. And for this, of course, we know that the case of the polytheists of Arabia is entirely different. They were the ones upon whom the Prophet had communicated the truth to the ultimate extent. So therefore, they are the ones who are being discussed here. Now, as far as the Jews and Christians of Arabia are concerned, although they also indulged in blatant forms of polytheism, but since they did not subscribe to polytheism, in fact, they shunned polytheism and they subscribed to monotheism. So therefore, they are not called as mushrik. And there is not a single verse in the Quran. I say this with reasonable surety, that there is not a single verse in the Quran which actually calls the Jews and Christians to be mushrik or polytheists, in spite of the fact that they indulge in polytheism. Why? As I just said, that this is because that they themselves call themselves to be monotheists, and the way they do so might not be agreeable to the Quran, and definitely it is not, because it has criticized them. But it has accepted their word on the face of it, that if they themselves subscribe to monotheism, then they shall not be called polytheists. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَ فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. And now that the issue of marriage has been raised, they ask you about the menstruation of women. Say it is a kind of impurity. Therefore, keep away from women during their menstrual cycles or menstrual periods, and do not approach them until they are in a state of purity. Then when they are clean after having a bath, approach them from where God has enjoined you about it. Surely, God loves those who repent and those who keep themselves clean. نساؤكم حرث لكم فأتوا حرثكم أن شئتم وقدموا لأنفسكم واتقوا الله واعلموا أنكم ملاقوه وبشر المؤمنين. These women of yours are your cultivated land. So come into your cultivated lands in any manner you please, and through this plan the future of both this and the next world, and remain fearful of God, and fully bear in mind that you shall surely meet Him one day. And O Prophet, give glad tidings of success and salvation to the believers on this instance of meeting. So remember, the basic objective of religion is purification. And all divine religions, they have prohibited sexual contact with one's wife during the menstrual cycle. Of course, when we talk about sexual contact, it refers to sexual intercourse. All of the forms of sexual contact are allowed. But intercourse is something which is not allowed during the puerperal discharge and the menstrual discharge. And as the adherents to the creed and practices of Abraham, the Arabs also, they knew that these relations are prohibited and unlawful, and there was no difference of opinion in this regard. However, there existed certain extremes and undue restrictions regarding the limits of withdrawal from one's wife during these periods. So it is evident from the answer given by the Quran that the question in fact remained or pertained to these limits, that when should one approach one's wife. So the Quran says once she is through her menstrual cycle and she has had a bath, then the right thing is that you approach her. And one thing which the Quran has also pointed out here is that min haysu amarakumullah, which means that in the manner that God has ordained in your own instinct, which of course is the vaginal intercourse, and which means that any other form of intercourse, whether it's anal intercourse or oral intercourse or any other form that humankind might end up inventing, the Almighty has proscribed it, has prohibited it, and said that only the natural way is the way which God has ordained. And then it is also said that although your women are like your cultivated lamb, and this is something of a metaphor which the Almighty has said, and in fact is similar, by comparing women to the land. And because the Arabs were farmers and they knew that farming a land was something which was very dear to them, they would be very careful in farming their land, they would protect their land, they would also stand on guard against their land. So that is why, in order to make them realize how important this is, that women are compared to their own cultivated land, that yes, they can come to their cultivated land in any way they want to, but then it has to be what is ordained in their instincts, which is the proper way. And the Quran says that وَقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ, which means that you can plan for the future. And let me also translate this last verse. It says that these women of yours are your cultivated land. So come into your lands in any manner you please. And through this, plan for the future of both this and the next world. And remain fearful of God, and fully bear in mind that you shall surely meet Him one day. And, O Prophet, give glad tidings of success and salvation to the believers on this instance of meeting. So once again, believers are being told that how important it is to come to your wives in a manner in which they are clean, they have taken a bath, and they have now in a position that they have washed away the impurity that they were going through, and it is now fine that you should come to them. So with this, we come to an end to this section of verses, and I'd like to start off the literal translation of these verses. If there are any questions, I'll wait for them, and you can ask those questions, and once we are through with them, then I shall begin or resume with the literal translation.
So, sir, you said that they asked the question twice about what should they spend. Based on what I'm able to understand, Allah did not answer their question the first time. They were asking what should they spend, not on which heads should they spend. But the first answer that Allah gave was you should, whatever you will end up spending will be given to your parents and the relatives and all the other. And in the second question, Allah actually provided them an answer, which is that you should be spending whatever is extra, whatever is left over from your basic necessities. So why is this? Why did Allah not answer their question the first time, what they were asking for? And it looks like Allah actually answered their question the second time they asked the question again.
I think if you look at Surah Baqarah, you'll find that this is in fact the third instance. So this yas'alunaka maza yunfiqun has occurred before these two instances as well, and this is like a gradual progression of questions. And it does seem that in these first two instances they were not satisfied, and I mean the Quran wanted to direct their attention towards the heads of these charities, so that instead of thinking of how much, they concentrate more on who they need to spend, because this is something that would spur them on, inspire them to spend as much as they would. Because once you are told that, well, the money that you have, regardless of the amount that you need to spend, look who are the people who will receive your spending. They are your parents, they are your kinsfolk, and such people. So basically the Quran has inspired them by making them sympathetic to the heads instead of pointing out the amount initially. So it's like telling you that, well, if you have to spend about your mother or on your mother, I mean, I don't need to tell you that how much you should spend on your mother, because this is a cause that is so dear to you. So basically, it was like an appeal or an emotional appeal which was presented by the Quran, that instead of asking how much, look, this is the place that you are spending, so don't ask how much. But it seems that they persisted, and as a result of this persistence, the Almighty said, well, now that you have asked once again, it does seem that you have not concentrated on the answer that was given previously, and that related to the heads of spending. Okay, if you have anything which is spare, which is surplus, which is beyond your needs, which you don't use either in your business or your personal expenditures, whether they belong to the past or the present, then this is something that does not belong to you. You must spend it. So basically, it's that mental attitude of trying to evade the answer, or the right way in which the Almighty would like you to reflect, that has gradually ended up in this final question.
Right, sir. The second question that I had was about the word tukhalituhum. In tukhalituhum fa ikhwanukum. And I will switch my language to Arabic to put this question, sorry, language to Urdu to ask this question appropriately. So, tukhalituhum fa ikhwanukum का तर्जुमा गामदी साहब ने ये किया है कि, और आपने भी ये किया है कि अगर तुम उनकी माँ से निकाह करके उन्हें अपने साथ शामिल कर लो, तो वो तुम्हारे भाई हैं। I have an objection to this translation, क्योंकि अगर मैं किसी के साथ शादी कर लेता हूँ, किसी की माँ के साथ शादी कर लेता हूँ, तो वो मेरा बेटा बनता है, ना कि मेरा भाई। और इसका तर्जुमा और बाकी जहाँ पर भी किया गया है, किसी और ट्रांसलेशन में मैंने यही तर्जुमा देखा है कि अगर तुम उनका खर्च और उनका रहना-सहना अपने साथ मुश्तरक रख लो, तो इसमें कोई मुज़ायका नहीं, आखिर वो तुम्हारे भाई ही तो हैं। अगर तो एक और तर्जुमा जो कि ये तफ़हीमुल कुरान से मैंने बताया, एक और तर्जुमा ये है कि अगर तुम उनको अपने साथ मिलाए रखो, तो वो तुम्हारे भाई ही तो हैं।
Right.
तो why would this be translated as if you marry their mothers, then they become, and if you marry their mothers, obviously they will not become their brothers, but they would rather
I
become your
understand. Right. So you see, this has been translated in view of what has been said elsewhere in the Quran, in Surah Nisa in particular, where it is said that if you would like to marry the orphans, for the welfare of the orphans, you can marry their mothers. So you see, if you pick up Surah Nisa, it says clearly that if it is easier for you to maintain the welfare, and for that, if you would like to marry their mothers, because these mothers would then be able to look after these orphans very well. So I think this is from where Ustaz has taken cue from, that taking care of the orphans becomes much more easy if you marry their mothers. So the Quran, at that instance in Surah Nisa, has said, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى. But if you think that you'll not be able to do justice with these orphans, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. You can marry from amongst the women, 2, 3, or 4 of these, who are the mothers of these orphans. So I think this is the context that has been taken into account. And the word tukhalituhum, actually, it tells us that you can mingle with them, and this mingling is not by just mingling your money with them. It is basically mingling with their mothers in order to marry them, and then of course those mothers would be able to do justice to their own children, who become their own sons. Now the question that فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ is not appropriate because these are your brothers. Well, the word brother here is not used in the sense that we use it as brothers. In the case that become brothers, it actually means that they become of your own kin. They become related to you, just as we use the word brother in a broader sense. So it's not that the word brother is actually referring to the fact that you become your brother, because as you said that they are not brothers. In that case, they would become sons because you would be marrying their mothers. But the word brother, as I said, is not used in that literal sense. It is used in that broad sense in which you generally use it. And the word khalat actually is the important one here, that you mix them with your own selves. And as I said, Al-Quran yufassiru ba'zuhum ba'za, the one place of the Quran explains the other place, and I think it is this instance of Surah Nisa which is in the mind of Ustaz when he has translated this. And of course, my translation is just a translation of his translation.
So, sorry, the word tukhalituhum is also in Surah Nisa, is what you said?
No, I said, yeah, it occurs in Surah Nisa also, in other context, but in Surah Nisa the words are وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى. If you think that you'll not be able to deal justly with these orphans, then you can marry their mothers. So the context of marrying their mothers is actually something which Surah Nisa has already mentioned. And khalata, which means that you make them come together, is just a concise word for the same expression that has been used in a more broader sense in Surah Nisa. So if you could study the first 2 or 3 verses of Surah Nisa, you'll get to know how they are related to this verse.
In the word Ifwanukum usually mean, it could also mean bloodline or family. That is also something that we can get from Quran, or
I mean, you see the word you see this word occurs in Surah Tawbah. It says, "فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ." They are your brothers in religion, which means that they are your brethren in the broad sense that all of you are brothers. And the word ikhwan, as you can see in the Urdu language, in the English language, in any language, when it is used in this sense that they are your brothers, you can use them if the context is such that they connote your real brothers, and you can use them as a fraternity, something which is a fraternity, depending on the context.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We have a chat question that asks, is it compulsory to take bath after menstruation and before having intercourse, or could you just take one bath?
So, well, the proper etiquette which the Quran has described here is that once women are through with their menstrual cycles, then they should have a bath. However, if sexual intercourse is done before she having her bath, then of course, this is something that would go against the etiquette which the Quran has mentioned, but it cannot be termed as haram or something which has been committed as something which was proscribed.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem. Asif Hadi, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sab. My
Right.
question is related to the ayah al-Khamr wal-Maisir, because as far as the Khamr is concerned, the article Alif Lam is used over there. So some people say that it means that there is a specific Khamr or a specific Maisir over there. How about the modern world Khamr, and how we will apply that same concept to the modern day Hammer or modern day Maser, because that is a specific Maser or specific Hammer. And
So you see,
related to that, I think in Surah Muhammad, if I'm not wrong, the wine or sharab is used as a basically reward for the people hereafter. And here, Allah is saying that it is ism. There is a guna in that. But over there, it's like they is saying that, well, it is allowed for the people who are rewarded hereafter. So why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at one place is prohibiting them and another place is saying that it's a reward?
So, as far as your first question is concerned, the Alif Lam on Al Khamr and Al Maisir is not of Ahad, it's of Jins, which means that anything which qualifies as Khamr or as Maisir, which means that any form of gambling or any form of drink which intoxicates a person. So, basically, intoxicant is the right translation, which would actually make you realize that the essence which is implied here is intoxication. And similar is the case with gambling. Of course, Maisir was different in the forms of the Prophet. Gambling has had various shapes, but the essence of gambling is that it's a game of chance. So wherever you have this game of chance is classified as gambling. So I think that this is a genre that has been prescribed by the Quran, that all forms of intoxicants and all forms of gambling, about them, the prohibition is there. But of course, when the question was asked, the question was regarding a particular form of gambling and a particular form of intoxicant which was available in Arabia. But since the what we call the reason of that prohibition, whenever it is found in something different which was not existent in those times, then the directive would be the same. For example, in the times of Arabia, in the times of the Prophet, we find that alcohol or intoxicants were created out of very, very particular entities, like for example dates, like for example olives, or there were 5 or 6 things. But this only means that the alcohol that existed there was created from a certain stuff or material, and if it is now created out of some other stuff and it produces the same effect and it intoxicates a person, it of course would mean that the directive is the same. So the product is now different. It's made out of a different substance or material, but since now it has the same properties as what an intoxicant would be having, so we say that, well, it doesn't matter that if now we have a different form of intoxicant. The real thing is that it is behaving in the same manner as intoxicants would do. And as far as your second question is concerned, the Quran has itself clarified it and said that the word sharab actually in Arabic means a drink. And it is up to you to make it alcoholic or a non-alcoholic drink. And the Quran says that the sharab that will be available in the hereafter would be something which will be pleasing to your taste buds, and it will not have the evil effects that the sharab of this world has. In other words, it will be a drink that would be absolutely refreshing for you. So the word sharab has to be understood in its context. It says it in the Arabic language, when the context is such that it is used for an intoxicant, we generally have the word khamr. And the word sharab is a word which is generally has a negative connotation in the Urdu language. But in the Arabic language, everything which can be classified as a drink is called sharab. So sharab is not something which is bad. I mean, it is khamr which is bad. So, and what has happened is that in the Urdu language, because sharab is always used for alcohol, do we think that the Quranic sharab is the same as the sharab that of this world as well? So the Quran has made this clarification that as far as the sharab of the hereafter is concerned, it will not intoxicate, it will be something which will not cause any headache, it will not make you lose your senses. It will be a very refreshing and a very pleasing drink. But the word is used is the same as the word sharab. And the word sharab actually means a drink. It does not have that negative connotation as it has in the Urdu language.
Okay. So here, if I understand it correctly, when you say alif lam, not as ahad alif lam, it's like it's
of
not
jins.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. I had a question regarding verses 217 and 218. So if I understand this correctly, to get Allah's rahmah, you need to believe, of course, migrate, and also jahid in his cause. But then the other end of the extreme is people who disbelieve or not have faith. But that's like a huge range, and I'm trying to understand. So like anybody, because most people that I know are somewhere in the middle where like they have faith, but they might not be very mindful of following all the pillars of Islam, for example. So like, does the rahmah only come if you are you're a mu'min, but you're following everything and you're going to the extreme of migration and jihad, versus if you're like somewhere more in the middle where you're trying your best to do everything?
So you see, these verses have a very specific context. They don't have a general context. They are talking about Muslims who were forced to migrate from Mecca, and they came to Medina, and then later on others followed them. So Innal lazina hajaru wa jahadu is not a general statement being given about all those people who migrate in all other periods of time. It is specifically referring to the Muslim migration which took place in the times of the Prophet. The words are general, but the context is special. So about them it is being said, Ulaika yarjuna rahmatullah, that they should hope for God's mercy. So the directive of migration, other than the migration that we are talking about, which took place with the Prophet in those times from Mecca to Medina, other than that, yes, we have forms of migration which are mentioned in the Quran. And they are mentioned in Surah Nisa, in which it is said that if people are persecuted for their faith, which means that they are not able to practice their faith, and then they also have a place where they can go and migrate to, then the Quran says that it is incumbent upon such people to leave that place where they are not able to practice their faith and then go to that place which welcomes them. So that is another form of migration which is mentioned elsewhere in the Quran, and we'll be coming to that inshallah when we read Surah Nisa. But the one that we're discussing here, as I said, is specific to what had happened in the times of the Prophet.
Thank you. That clarified a lot. One more point that I wanted to raise from there, but I'll do that after a chat question. So the question asks about verse 221, and they're saying that due to this verse, it seems that a person can order any man or woman who is Muslim but has committed a lot of sin. or any religious person just because they want to save the next generation.
I could not get the question. Let me see what the verse, what exactly, how does this happen? How can this be derived from the verse?
So they're saying that because the verse says that you should لا تنكحوا المشركين, right?
Right.
That means that you can marry any Muslim person, but or a person of book, but even if they've committed a lot of sins, but this is just to save the next generation.
This is not what the verse says. It says لا تنكحوا المشركات حتى يؤمنن. It says that you should not marry idolatrous women unless they profess faith, which actually tells us that you can marry, I mean, you can even go as far as to marry a Muslim slave instead of marrying someone outside that cadre. I mean, you see, well, the point that the Quran is making here is that idolatry is so heinous a sin that someone who professes idolatry should not be engaged with. And in that case, engaging with people who are one less in status, which were the slaves of those times. So the Quran says marrying them is much better than marrying people who are idolatrous. So this is what the Quran.
They're clarifying that they mean that you marry someone with sins, like a lot of sins, like sins for saving next generation.
I mean, this is something which is not mentioned here. I mean, this is something which can be taken up separately, but the Quran is not referring to whether you marry with someone who is sinful or not. All that it is saying is that you should not marry people who subscribe to polytheism, who are people who would say that we are polytheists, and the Quran says that it is much better to forego them and marry a slave, because someone who is a slave is better than a person who subscribes to polytheism. Other than that, there is nothing being discussed here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem, for that clarification. Imran, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. So, Dr. Saleem, just a quick question on the migration issue. So, that Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina because, the Muslims weren't allowed to pray in peace or live in peace, and they were being tortured and killed. So, in this day and age, if Muslims who are being oppressed and tortured and killed, let's say, in Palestine and elsewhere, that means Islamically and legally, they have the right to migrate from that land. But then, if they don't have the option, then they should just stay there.
Of course. You see, there are two conditions: that if you are being persecuted for your faith, and you also have a place where you can migrate to. If you don't do that, then the Quran says you would be sinning. But in their case, of course, you don't have a place to migrate to. This option on most occasions is not there. And also, we have also to see whether this is persecution or not, because you see, persecution is that you are forcibly disallowed from practicing your faith. That is one thing, and waging war, as is the case which is going on there, is another thing. So I think we have to make this distinction, that persecution, where it means that you are living in a regime in which you are not being able to practice your basic tenets of faith, like for example offering your prayer or fasting or going for Hajj, etc. And you also have a place where you can easily go and migrate to. Remember, when the Quran was being revealed and these verses were there were no entities that we call countries. They all appeared in the map much later. And in those times, the territory that a person would have would be, as long as he would go and occupy that territory, he would become the owner of that territory. And also, in cases where there were rulers, there were no such thing as stopping them from coming to their own place. People would be going freely from one place to another place. So that is why the Quran has said that in these circumstances, when you can go from one place to another place without any problem, and you're also not being allowed to practice faith in one place, you should go to the other place where you can easily do so. So those are the lines which are being drawn by the Quran. And today, of course, we have to see how this is going to happen. I mean, we know the principle, but the application of the principle is something that has to be seen in circumstances.
I see. Just one question. I don't know if this is not the time, we can ask it later, but because many times the Muslims have fought as one army, they said it has to be one Amir, one leader. But even when Muslim conquered the Jerusalem the first time, all Muslims weren't conquered under one banner, like they were different, like khilafas and stuff. And after Nuruddin Zangi, we know Salahuddin came, but he had one army. But then there were the eastern part of the empires were different, and the Turkic empires are different. So when it's said that you have to have one Amir, that means that one Amir for the whole Muslim Ummah?
So, no, it means from one country, one political entity is authorized to attack. So, one country, I mean, it's not that all Muslim countries have to unite. Any Muslim entity which has a legal status as a country. So, if this is what was done, as we know from in the case of Salahuddin Ayyubi, when he took away Jerusalem from them, he was sent by the Amir. He was sent on behalf of the Amir, so therefore he was authorized, a general authorized on their behalf. So it's not that all Muslims have to have one Amir, it's that one warring country, any warring country should be authorized to do that.
Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you.
Iqra, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Sir, my question is, how do you see the today's migration, people migrating to non-Muslim countries for economic reasons or just a better life, even though they are not having much bad life in their own countries? So we see, apparently it seems like it's their freedom, they don't have any restrictions to follow the religion, but psychologically and practically it becomes very difficult to follow the practices. For example, when I was living in UAE, and even before coming to Sweden, my husband was praying punctually 5 times prayers, but now no practice. So how do you see this migration? Is it, how do we categorize this?
I mean, there's nothing which religion stops us from migrating to any place in the world. I mean, this is a decision that you have to take personally. Obviously, when you take a decision, you view a number of things, your job opportunities, the children that you're going to rear, and how you would be able to protect your faith. So all these things, they come in a package, and as long as you are reasonably sure that you'll be able to practice as a good person, as a good Muslim, you can migrate to any place in the world. And this migration has not been, proscribed or forbidden or stopped by Quran in any way. It's a decision that you have to take, keeping in view your own circumstances, and everyone has different circumstances. But I mean, there's no embargo on migration. There's nothing prohibited regarding migration. But as I said, there is one migration which becomes incumbent, which becomes an obligation, and that is when you are persecuted for your faith, which means that you are not able to practice your faith, and you also have a place where you can go and settle yourselves in. When this happens, the Quran says it is incumbent upon people to migrate, and the Quran says if people don't migrate in such instances, then the Almighty is going to be angry with them, and the angels are going to claim their souls in a way that they'll be really, really be put to pain. So therefore, this is the only obligation of migration in those circumstances. Other than that, it's like a decision that you need to take according to your own circumstances.
So, Dr. Saleem, regarding menstruation, there are some narratives that say, I think it's either 12 or 14 days. If your period goes beyond that, then you should resume praying. Is that true? Because I don't see that in the Quran.
The Quran actually refers to menstruation as a normal happening, and other than that, this is a fiqh question that what if the menstruation prolongs, it goes beyond the prescribed time. So I think this is a matter in which doctors have to intervene, if they say that this blood that you are that which is oozing out is not of menstruation, but it is of istihaza, as we know is called in Arabic, which means that it is basically a superfluous form of blood which does not relate to menstrual blood, then it is fine that you pray. So I think the correct question, or the correct person to ask this are doctors. And in the times of the Prophet, I think there was this question raised before him as well, and it was not 14, but if I remember correctly, it was he said that, well, anything which is beyond those 7, or I think he said the word 7 if I am remembering it correctly. I need to check, and I think you can check as well, that the word that he did or the number that he prescribed was 7. So anything which is beyond those 7 or 8 days of your normal menstruation should not be treated as menstruation. Also, what we can draw from this is that every woman has her own peculiarities regarding the number of days. So there are some women who menstruate for a longer period, some for a shorter period. So whatever their normal period of menstruation is, once that passes, then if the blood still is coming out, then the Quran then we know from various sources that this actually is not the blood of that menstrual cycle. It's a superfluous blood. And in that case, all normal directives, like for example fasting or praying or doing tawaf, they can be carried out.
Yes, Dr. Saleem, it is 7 days, like you mentioned.
It's 7 days.
It is 7 days. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem.
जी सर, आपने ट्रांसलेशन करते हुए आप वो जहाँ पे आयत की ट्रांसलेशन की कि ला तनकिहु डू नॉट मैरी आइडोलेटर की, और जब लेडीज के लिए आया तो उनकी उनका निकाह ना करो, यानी करके दो। तो सर ये क्या डिफरेंस है कि वली की मतलब औरत अपना निकाह खुद नहीं कर सकती, या इसके लिए कोई लॉ है?
No, there's no such thing, because generally, I mean, women are supposed to have their nikah conducted by the society or by some guardian or by some parent that it is said so. So basically, men, when they are addressed directly, and it is said that you do not marry. But when women are addressed, the nature of address is that don't let them get married, or you get them married in such a way, because there is always someone who's conducting that nikah. So that is why this difference is made.
Otherwise, it's not a rule. She
Of course.
can.
Of course. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
she can.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Saleem, I had a question regarding what one of the participants had asked about marrying someone with sins. So in society where I am, it's very common for people to have premarital sex, and I, from some Muslims, have heard that they too, engage with that kind of stuff. And it worries me because I think, if you don't find someone who's saving themselves until marriage, then do you have to marry someone who's already done things before just because they're Muslims, versus marrying someone else who who's not Muslim, but they're, for example, like they're not Muslims, but they're doing stuff like Muslims are supposed to do.
So I think you have to understand this, that as far as marrying people are concerned, when the Quran says that you should marry chaste women or chaste men, it refers to the fact that, if they had any blemishes in the past, or they've had sex out of wedlock before getting actually married, and if this sin was not brought to the court's notice and they were not punished for that, then the Quran gives them the benefit of the doubt and still calls them as chaste people, as people who have protected their chastity. So, it's a choice that you have now. If you have people who are involved in this sin and they've maybe repented, or they've gone a long way, don't look back in any sense, and now they are changed individuals, it's a choice that you can make. And other than that, of course, we have no means to tell whether a person who had a different past will be the same person once he or she gets married, because people do change. But I think it's like a reasonable choice that you need to make yourself, that if the person that you have in mind is someone who might have had premarital relations, but now he or she has given them up, and you think that, well, he or she now deserves this chance, then I don't think there is any reason not to go ahead. And yes, there could be instances in which a person could be very finicky or very choosy, and he or she would say, well, I would not marry anyone who has had premarital contact, and I would like someone who is, absolutely pure. So these are choices that everyone has to make or needs to make. And I think that in the interest of humanity, and in the interest of the fact that all of us have our past, I think this is a choice that everyone should make, keeping in view the circumstances that he or she might be in.
But why can't you say that it's haram to marry someone who's had relationships in the past?
Because the Quran has not said it is haram. I am no one to say something which is haram unless the Quran says so. The Quran says that marrying women or marrying men who have been convicted by the court of adultery, only marrying them is prohibited. Other than that, the prohibition is not there. So, declared convicts of adultery, they are what the Quran says are prohibited for marriage. So, other than that, I mean, as I said, every person has a past, and every person who might have gone through this situation might have repented or totally come out of it, and therefore deserves a second chance. So, I think it is very wise that the Almighty did not proscribe it. Otherwise, a better part of the population would have been in quite a bother.
Thank you for that, Dr. Saleem. Imran, please go ahead.
Yes, I have just a quick question to follow up on this. In Surah Nur, this ayah has confused me before, where it says in the third verse, "Azani la yankihu illa zaniyatan aw mushrika wazaniyatu la yankihu illa zani aw mushrik wa hurrima dhalika al mu'minin." So basically, the zani man cannot marry, will not marry except a zani, a woman, or mushrik. So, if you can shed some light on this, thank you.
Well, this is what exactly I was talking about. The word zani or zania is not referring to people who are having sex out of wedlock. It is referring to people who are convicted, whose case has been brought before the courts, and now they are convicted adulterers. For them, the Quran says, "Hurrima zalika alal mu'mineen," that believers cannot marry such people. They can either marry amongst themselves or with idolaters, because they are condemned people, and they don't deserve to get married among pure people.
Thank you very much, Jazakumullah khairan. That's very clear. Thank you for the
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. We're almost out of time, so if we have no more questions, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful, happy new year, and inshallah filled with Allah's blessings and success to everyone, and Iman. And any last remarks before the end of this year, Dr. Saleem?
Well, it's a year that has been, all of us know that it has been tough on a lot of people, especially we know that the last couple of months have been especially tough for our brothers and sisters in Gaza and in Palestine. And we do pray that this ordeal that they are going through, it soon ends. And we also pray that all people, whether they are Muslims or not, all human beings are able to live peacefully on this planet Earth, because we have to remember that first lesson, which is the lesson of humanity, that basically we are the progeny of Adam and Eve, we are one big family, and we have to behave as one big family.